It was a crisp fall afternoon, and Mrs. Catherine Whittaker strolled through her neighborhood park. The golden leaves crunched under her feet as she made her way toward her favorite bench, the one overlooking the pond. She often came here to think, to read, or simply to watch the world go by. On this particular day, she was feeling nostalgic. Her son, William, had just celebrated his 40th birthday. Time had flown by, and Catherine couldn't help but remember the days when he was just a little boy, full of life and curiosity. She settled onto the bench, pulling her scarf tighter against the cool breeze. Across the field, she noticed a group of children flying kites. Their laughter carried through the air, warming her heart. One boy in particular caught her attention. He was perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with a bright smile and a lively spirit. He darted after his kite, his small legs working hard to keep up as the wind tugged at the string. Catherine's gaze lingered on him. There was something about this boy, something familiar. She watched as he stopped to adjust the kite's string, his hands moving with a determination that reminded her of someone. Then he looked up, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. It was like looking at a photograph of William as a child. The same wide eyes, the same lopsided grin. Could it really be just a coincidence? The boy didn't seem to notice her surprise. He went back to his kite, laughing as it soared higher into the sky. Catherine leaned back against the bench, her mind racing. The resemblance was uncanny. Memories of William at that age came rushing back. She remembered how he used to run through this same park, his favorite blue sweater flapping in the wind. She could almost hear his voice, calling out, "Look, Mom, I'm flying higher than anyone." Catherine shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. "It's just my imagination," she murmured to herself, but her eyes kept returning to the boy. He was playing with a group of friends now, taking turns with the kite. Yet even among the other children, he stood out to her. His laughter, his expressions, it all reminded her so much of her own son. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Catherine gathered her coat and prepared to head home. But before she left, she took one last look at the boy. He was still smiling, still playing, completely unaware of the impression he had made on her. Catherine walked away, her thoughts swirling. She had no idea who he was, where he came from, or why he looked so much like William. But something told her this was no ordinary coincidence. That evening, Mrs. Catherine Whittaker sat in her cozy living room, surrounded by old photo albums. The boy she'd seen in the park wouldn't leave her mind. She opened one of the albums, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the pages. There was William as a baby, his cheeks round and soft. She smiled as she traced the edge of the photograph. Turning the pages, she found the pictures she was looking for, ones of William as a young boy, about 8 or 9 years old. One photo in particular caught her eye. It was taken on his birthday, the year he'd gotten his first bicycle. He stood in the driveway, the bike proudly beside him, wearing a bright blue sweater. His smile was wide, his eyes bright with excitement. Catherine stared at the image, comparing it to the memory of the boy in the park. The resemblance was more than passing. It was as if the boy she'd seen was a mirror of her own son at that age. She leaned back on the sofa, the photo still in her hands. The laughter she'd heard, the way he ran after the kite. She could almost see her own William in those movements. It was uncanny, yet impossible. Catherine closed the album and placed it gently on the coffee table. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts. "It's just a coincidence," she said aloud. "Children can resemble one another sometimes." But deep down, she felt a tug she couldn't ignore. Memories of William's childhood flooded her mind. His curiosity, his determination, his mischievous grin whenever he was up to something. That night, as she prepared for bed, Catherine couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of wonder. Was it fate that had brought her to the park that day? She hadn't planned to go. In fact, she almost stayed home. But something had nudged her outside, and now she couldn't stop thinking about the boy. She wondered if she would see him again. The next morning, Catherine decided to return to the park. She carried a book, intending to read, but her eyes kept wandering to the spot where she had seen the boy. She sat for nearly an hour, but there was no sign of him. Feeling both disappointed and relieved, she finally left. As the days passed, Catherine tried to push the thoughts aside, but they crept back into her mind. The boy's face, so much like her son's, stayed with her. She told herself it was just her imagination. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this encounter. The memory of his laughter and the sight of his smile had stirred something deep within her, a mix of nostalgia, curiosity, and an unexplainable connection. Several days later, Catherine returned to the park once more. She brought her favorite novel to read, but her true purpose was to see if the boy would appear again. It was late afternoon, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. She settled on the bench, her book open on her lap, though her eyes wandered toward the area where the children had played before. Before long, a familiar laugh reached her ears. She turned and saw the boy again, this time holding the kite string steady, while a friend ran to catch the tail. He wore a bright red jacket and jeans that looked a size too big, but his smile was the same. Catherine's heart quickened. She watched him for a while, letting the simple joy of his play bring a small smile to her lips. After some time, she noticed a woman sitting on a bench nearby. The woman was young, likely in her early 30s, and her gaze followed the boy closely. Catherine realized she must be the boy's mother. Taking a deep breath, she decided to approach. "Excuse me," Catherine said, giving a polite smile. The woman looked up, a bit surprised. "I couldn't help but notice your son. He's such a lively young boy." The woman's expression softened. "Oh, thank you. Jamal is full of energy. I can barely keep up sometimes." "Jamal," Catherine repeated softly. She couldn't help but smile at the name. "I'm Catherine Whittaker. I live just down the road. It's nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too. I'm Lisa," the woman replied, her tone warm. They chatted casually for a while, mostly about the children playing in the park and the cool weather. Catherine worked up the courage to mention what had been on her mind. "I hope you don't think this is strange," she began, "but Jamal reminds me so much of my son when he was that age." Lisa chuckled. "I hear that a lot. People often tell me Jamal has one of those faces that makes them think of someone else." Catherine smiled, though she knew this resemblance felt different. She didn't press further, not wanting to seem intrusive. Instead, she enjoyed their brief conversation. Lisa told her a bit about how they'd recently moved to the area and how Jamal loved spending time outdoors. The more they talked, the more Catherine felt a strange sense of familiarity, though she couldn't place why. After a while, Jamal ran over, holding the kite proudly. "Mom, did you see how high it went?" he asked, his face glowing with excitement. Lisa laughed. "I saw, sweetie. You're getting really good at it." Catherine watched the exchange, her heart warming at their bond. When Lisa and Jamal left a short time later, Catherine remained on the bench, feeling a mix of curiosity and nostalgia. There was something about this boy, something she couldn't explain. She knew she would be back again, if only to see that bright smile one more time. When Catherine returned home that evening, her thoughts were still on Jamal. That name, that face, everything about him had planted a seed of curiosity in her mind. She went straight to the shelf in her study where the family photo albums were kept. The leather-bound albums were well worn from years of use, each one filled with snapshots of birthdays, vacations, and everyday moments. Pulling one down, she flipped through the pages slowly. There was her son William at age 5, standing proudly next to his first Christmas tree. Another photo showed him at 7, building a sandcastle on the beach. Finally, she found the photo she was looking for. It was William at 8 years old, grinning at the camera with a kite string in his hand. The memory came rushing back, how he had begged her to buy that kite, how he practiced for days in the backyard before finally taking it to the park. Catherine stared at the photograph, comparing it in her mind to the boy she'd seen earlier. The resemblance was uncanny. Jamal had the same smile, the same spark in his eyes, even the same way of tilting his head when he was concentrating. It must be a coincidence, Catherine said aloud, though she didn't entirely believe it. Her heart told her there was something more to this, something she couldn't yet explain. She placed the album on the coffee table and poured herself a cup of tea. Sitting by the window, she let her thoughts drift. She remembered how William was always curious as a child, always asking questions, always finding ways to fix things around the house. He had grown up to be a successful businessman, but in her mind, he was still that little boy running through the park. And now, seeing Jamal brought all those memories rushing back. Catherine wondered about Jamal's life. What had brought his family to this neighborhood? What did he dream of becoming when he grew up? The more she thought about him, the more she felt an urge to know him better. She wasn't sure why she felt this way. Was it just nostalgia? Or was there something more, something deeper? After finishing her tea, Catherine stood and returned the photo album to its shelf. She decided not to dwell on it too much for now. Perhaps the resemblance really was just a coincidence, a trick of her mind. But even as she tried to convince herself of that, she knew she would be looking for Jamal and Lisa again the next time she visited the park. There was something about that boy, something she couldn't ignore. The past and the present seemed to be intertwined, and Catherine had a feeling her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The next weekend, Catherine returned to the park, a small bag of cookies tucked under her arm. She had baked them the night before, hoping they might be a nice icebreaker if she ran into Lisa and Jamal again. Sure enough, as she rounded the corner near her favorite bench, she saw them. Jamal was once again running around with his kite, laughing as he tried to keep it from tangling in the trees. Catherine approached slowly, her heart beating just a little faster than usual. "Hello again," she called out with a warm smile. Lisa looked up and smiled back. "Oh, hello. Nice to see you." "I was doing some baking," Catherine said, holding up the bag, "and I thought I'd bring a little something to share." Lisa hesitated for a moment before nodding. "That's very kind of you. Thank you." She took the bag and opened it, offering one to Jamal, who came running over when he heard the word cookies. "Thanks, lady," Jamal said, his eyes lighting up as he bit into the treat. Catherine couldn't help but smile. There it was again, his expression, his excitement. It reminded her so much of William. "Catherine," she said, introducing herself properly this time. "You can call me Catherine." "Thanks, Miss Catherine," Jamal said between bites. The three of them sat on the bench, chatting casually. Catherine asked Jamal about school, his hobbies, and what he liked most about the park. She learned that he loved science and dreamed of building his own robots one day. As he talked, Catherine was struck by how bright and curious he was. It was like listening to William as a child all over again. Lisa seemed more relaxed this time, sharing little details about their family's recent move and how they were settling into the neighborhood. Catherine felt a growing sense of comfort around them, as though they were meant to cross paths. She couldn't quite put her finger on why, but she didn't question it. Sometimes, connections just happened. As the afternoon wore on, Catherine offered to read from the book she had brought. Jamal settled in beside her, listening intently as she turned the pages. Lisa watched with a smile, clearly pleased that Jamal was enjoying himself. By the time the sun started dipping lower in the sky, Catherine felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was a genuine fondness for this boy and his mother. She walked home that evening with a lighter step, thinking about how much she looked forward to seeing them again. Though Catherine still didn't fully understand the connection she felt, she knew it was something special. She had found a new friendship in Lisa and Jamal, and deep down, she suspected that their story was only just beginning. Over the next few weeks, Catherine found herself visiting the park more often. Each time she saw Jamal and Lisa, the bond between them grew stronger. Jamal would run up to her with a big smile, calling out, "Miss Catherine, Miss Catherine," as if she were his long-lost grandmother. Lisa seemed happy for the extra company, and Catherine enjoyed their conversations more than she cared to admit. But the question still lingered in Catherine's mind. Why did Jamal look so much like William? She kept brushing it off as mere coincidence, but the resemblance was too striking to ignore. His smile, the way he laughed, even his little habit of tilting his head when he was curious. It was all too familiar. And it wasn't just his face. Jamal's interest in science, his knack for figuring things out, his quick wit, they all reminded her of William at that age. One evening, Catherine sat down with her old family photo albums again. This time, she dug deeper, searching through pictures she hadn't looked at in years. As she flipped through the pages, she began to notice small details she'd forgotten. There were pictures of William playing in the backyard, holding a model rocket he'd built, and another of him standing next to his father, grinning from ear to ear. Then Catherine found an old family tree chart that she hadn't thought about in years. It was incomplete, more of a rough sketch than a proper record, but it listed a few distant relatives she barely remembered. She traced the lines with her finger, wondering if there could be a long-lost cousin or a branch of the family she had never met. Could Jamal's family be connected to hers in some way? She didn't know, but the thought stirred a mix of curiosity and hope in her. The next time she saw Lisa at the park, Catherine hesitated before bringing it up. She didn't want to offend or sound nosy, but after a pleasant conversation about how well Jamal was doing in school, Catherine decided to gently ask, "Lisa, I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you always lived in this area?" Lisa shook her head. "No, we only moved here recently. Before that, we lived a few towns over." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just curious," Catherine said quickly, trying not to seem too eager. "I've lived here for so long, and sometimes I wonder if I might know someone from your family. Small world and all." Lisa smiled politely. "I don't think so, but you never know." Catherine let the topic drop, but her mind was racing. She didn't have any concrete answers, but she was beginning to think that her connection to Jamal might run deeper than she initially thought. For now, she would wait, but something told her that the truth would eventually come to light. The thought of Jamal's resemblance to her son William stayed with Catherine. She spent countless nights going over it in her mind. Could it really just be coincidence, or was there something more? She found herself replaying her conversations with Lisa, searching for any small clue, but nothing ever seemed to confirm her suspicions. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing a piece of the puzzle. One evening, as she sat in her quiet living room, Catherine reached for the telephone. She hadn't spoken to William in a few days, and she often worried about him. She dialed his number, feeling a familiar mix of warmth and anxiety. "Hi, Mom," William answered, his voice steady and calm as always. "Hi, sweetheart. I just wanted to see how you're doing," Catherine replied, trying to sound casual. They talked for a while, catching up on the usual topics. Catherine told him about her gardening, and William shared a few details about his latest business project. The conversation was pleasant, but Catherine felt her heart racing. She wanted to ask him something about his childhood, about any old connections that might explain Jamal, but she held back. What if he thought she was being foolish? What if there was nothing to it, and she ended up worrying him for no reason? "Well, I'm glad you're doing well," Catherine said, preparing to end the call. "Thanks, Mom. And you know, if you ever need anything, just call, okay?" William's voice was kind, reassuring. It made her hesitate. Before she could stop herself, she blurted, "William, do you remember that time you and your father built that model rocket? You must have been about 8. William chuckled. "Of course. I remember it took us a whole weekend, but it was worth it." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," Catherine said quickly. "Just reminiscing." They hung up soon after, but Catherine's thoughts didn't settle. She sat back in her chair, staring out the window at the darkening sky. The truth was, she wasn't sure what she was looking for. Maybe she hoped that a memory of William's would spark a connection, or that something he said would explain the resemblance she saw in Jamal. but nothing seemed to lead her to an answer. Catherine knew she had a choice. She could keep her thoughts to herself, holding on to her quiet suspicions, or she could take the next step and share her feelings with William. Maybe if she told him about Jamal, he'd have some insight, some story from the past that would bring everything into focus. But the risk was clear. If she was wrong, she could stir up confusion or unnecessary worry. As she turned off the lights and prepared for bed, Catherine made up her mind. The next time she spoke with William, she would tell him. It was a difficult decision, but she couldn't let her questions go unanswered any longer. Catherine sat down with her son William in her sunlit dining room. The air was filled with the warm smell of freshly brewed tea. She had been rehearsing this conversation in her mind for days, but now that the moment had arrived, her words felt tangled. "William," she began, her voice softer than usual, "I need to tell you something that's been on my mind." William looked up from his cup, curious but calm. "What is it, Mom?" "I've met someone in the park. A young boy. His name is Jamal. He reminds me so much of you when you were his age." Catherine paused, her hands nervously folding the napkin in her lap. "Not just the way he looks, but his mannerisms, his interests. It's uncanny, really." William nodded, waiting for her to continue. She hesitated, unsure how to frame what she wanted to say. "This might sound strange," she finally said, "but I can't help wondering if there's some connection. I mean, it's probably just a coincidence, but—" She trailed off, hoping William would understand what she was getting at without her having to say it outright. William frowned slightly, considering her words. "You're saying this boy looks like me?" "Yes," Catherine replied. "And not just looks, he reminds me of you in so many ways." For a moment, the room was silent. Catherine could hear the ticking of the old clock on the wall, each sound amplifying her uncertainty. "Mom," William said slowly, "there's something I should probably tell you." Catherine's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" William sighed. "I haven't thought about this in years, but before I left for business school, I dated someone from a nearby town. It was a short relationship, and we lost touch. I didn't even know she was pregnant. If she was, she never told me." Catherine stared at him, her thoughts spinning. "You mean, you think Jamal could be?" William nodded slightly. "It's possible. I don't know for sure, but it's possible." Catherine leaned back, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She didn't know what to say. The boy who had seemed so familiar, so connected to her own past, might actually be part of their family. "What do you want to do?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," William admitted. "This is a lot to process, but I think I'd like to meet him. If there's even a chance he's my son, I need to know." Catherine nodded, her heart heavy but hopeful. The unexpected revelation had changed everything. It wasn't just her imagination after all. There was a real possibility that Jamal was connected to their family in a way she'd never dreamed. A week later, Catherine sat on her usual park bench, watching Jamal chase his kite once again. She had been coming here nearly every day, unsure of how to approach what she now knew. William had agreed to meet Jamal and Lisa, but Catherine had wanted to speak to Lisa first. She felt it was only fair. When Lisa arrived that day, her smile as warm as always, Catherine took a deep breath. "Lisa, do you have a moment to talk?" "Of course," Lisa said, sitting down beside her. Catherine hesitated, unsure how to start. "I want to share something with you. I don't mean to intrude, but there's something about your son, about Jamal, that I can't ignore." Lisa tilted her head, curious but patient. "Go on." Catherine explained how Jamal reminded her of her own son, how his looks, his mannerisms, and even his interests were so similar. She carefully revealed that William had once been in a relationship years ago, and it was possible, though not certain, that Jamal might be his child. Lisa's smile faltered slightly, and she looked away for a moment, her hands tightening around the edge of the bench. When she turned back to Catherine, her voice was soft. I don't know what to say. I never told Jamal's father. I didn't think he wanted to be involved. But if there's a chance. Catherine placed a comforting hand on Lisa's. I understand this must be overwhelming. It's overwhelming for me too. But William would like to meet Jamal, and I think it could be good for both of them to know the truth. Lisa was quiet for a long time. Finally, she nodded. If William wants to meet him, then I think Jamal deserves to know. I've always tried to give him the best I could on my own, but maybe it's time he met his father. A few days later, William joined Catherine at the park. She felt a mixture of nerves and hope as she introduced him to Lisa and Jamal. Jamal's bright smile and curious eyes seemed to light up the moment he met William, as if he instinctively sensed a connection. The two quickly fell into easy conversation, talking about kites, robots, and everything in between. As Catherine watched them together, she felt her heart swell. The boy she had met by chance, the boy who had brought back so many memories, was now part of their lives in a way she never expected. And while there were still questions and challenges ahead, Catherine knew they had all taken an important first step toward understanding, healing, and family. From that day on, Catherine, Lisa, William, and Jamal began forging a new chapter in their lives. What had started as a chance encounter in the park turned into something much greater. A journey of connection, acceptance, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Several days later, Catherine returned to the park once more. She brought her favorite novel to read, but her true purpose was to see if the boy would appear again. It was late afternoon, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. She settled on the bench, her book open on her lap, though her eyes wandered toward the area where the children had played before. Before long, a familiar laugh reached her ears. She turned and saw the boy again, this time holding the kite string steady, while a friend ran to catch the tail. He wore a bright red jacket and jeans that looked a size too big, but his smile was the same. Catherine's heart quickened. She watched him for a while, letting the simple joy of his play bring a small smile to her lips. After some time, she noticed a woman sitting on a bench nearby. The woman was young, likely in her early 30s, and her gaze followed the boy closely. Catherine realized she must be the boy's mother. Taking a deep breath, she decided to approach. "Excuse me," Catherine said, giving a polite smile. The woman looked up, a bit surprised. "I couldn't help but notice your son. He's such a lively young boy." The woman's expression softened. "Oh, thank you. Jamal is full of energy. I can barely keep up sometimes." "Jamal," Catherine repeated softly. She couldn't help but smile at the name. "I'm Catherine Whittaker. I live just down the road. It's nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too. I'm Lisa," the woman replied, her tone warm. They chatted casually for a while, mostly about the children playing in the park and the cool weather. Catherine worked up the courage to mention what had been on her mind. "I hope you don't think this is strange," she began, "but Jamal reminds me so much of my son when he was that age." Lisa chuckled. "I hear that a lot. People often tell me Jamal has one of those faces that makes them think of someone else." Catherine smiled, though she knew this resemblance felt different. She didn't press further, not wanting to seem intrusive. Instead, she enjoyed their brief conversation. Lisa told her a bit about how they'd recently moved to the area and how Jamal loved spending time outdoors. The more they talked, the more Catherine felt a strange sense of familiarity, though she couldn't place why. After a while, Jamal ran over, holding the kite proudly. "Mom, did you see how high it went?" he asked, his face glowing with excitement. Lisa laughed. "I saw, sweetie. You're getting really good at it." Catherine watched the exchange, her heart warming at their bond. When Lisa and Jamal left a short time later, Catherine remained on the bench, feeling a mix of curiosity and nostalgia. There was something about this boy, something she couldn't explain. She knew she would be back again, if only to see that bright smile one more time.